We're pleased to have you join us for today's webinar, Be Better at Assessing and Developing Talent, Strategies for the Employee Lifecycle. This webinar is co-sponsored by the Aberdeen Group and CPP Incorporated. CPP is the exclusive publisher of several powerful assessments, including the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. My name is Laura Simons, Product Marketing Manager here at CPP, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Before I introduce our two speakers, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping details. Today's webinar will run approximately 1 hour, with the last 10 to 15 minutes reserved for question and answer. If you have a question, please submit it via the questions box located on the right side of your screen. You can submit your questions throughout the presentation, and we will address as many as possible. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll send out a link to the recording in just a few days, as well as a copy of the presentation slides, and it will be posted on our website, cpp.com. Today's speakers are Mollie Lombardi and Sherrie Haynie. Mollie is a research director at the Aberdeen Group with a key focus on human capital management. Her work uncovers the best-in-class strategies and leads to better understanding of today's key challenges facing HR and talent management leaders. Sherrie Haynie is an organizational development consultant at CPP with a focus on organizational results. She is also an MBTI certification trainer. Mollie, I'd like to turn the presentation over to you.
Well, thank you so much, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone who's joining us today. I'm really pleased to be here with you today, sharing with you some insights from our latest research. And our agenda today is really going to start with an introduction and overview. I'm going to share with you a little bit about our research methodology and where all the data that I'll be sharing with you comes from here today. We're going to talk about how you build the case for the use of assessments and really how organizations are finding the business value of their use of assessments in both the pre and the post-hire. We're going to talk a little bit about choosing the right tools, making sure you understand which assessments can be used for which decisions and how to best put them to use for your organization. And then we're also going to talk about how you use the insights gleaned from the assessments that you use to really craft an employee experience. It's going to help you attract, retain, and develop the people you need to execute on your business strategy. And as we mentioned, we'll do a little bit of a wrap-up and a Q&A at the end. So I wanted to start first with a little bit of background on where all the data that I'm going to be presenting comes from. In April of 2011, we published a survey, a study on assessments, as it looked at over 500 organizations and their assessment strategies. And the respondents to this survey were really from a wide variety of industries and geographies. And it was a really comprehensive look at the use of assessments throughout the talent lifecycle. One of the things that really differentiates Aberdeen's research is it's really about holding up a mirror to you, organizations like yours in situations similar to yours, and what they're doing to really drive results for their business. So all of our research is very focused on driving end-user results. It's not about feature functionality. It's not about vendor rankings. It's not about what one or two companies are doing. It's really about what real companies are doing to drive value for their organization. Now, the way we go about investigating any topic, whether it's assessments or any other topic within human capital management or in one of the other 16 other practices here at Aberdeen, it all starts with our methodology. And at the core of that methodology is our PACE framework. At Aberdeen, PACE stands for Pressures, Actions, Capabilities, and Enablers. And what that really means is we want to understand at the highest level, what are the pressures causing people to think about these issues differently? So in this case, for assessments, what are the macroeconomic pressures? What are the external pressures causing organizations to look at their use of assessments in talent management? Then we want to understand in response to those pressures, what are the actions organizations are taking? What are the strategies they're putting in place to help them combat those pressures? And of course, to be able to execute on a strategy, organizations need a series of capabilities and enablers, whether those be organizational or process capabilities or tools, technologies, and services that allow them to execute on their goals. And I always describe the PACE as the what. It really talks about what organizations are doing, which can be very useful. But it's even more useful when it's brought together with the second part of our methodology, the best-in-class maturity framework. Now, everyone who comes through one of our surveys answers questions not only around the pressures, actions, capabilities, and enablers within their organization, but they also answer questions on key metrics. Now, we use a subset of those metrics that are tied to that particular topic to call out the best in class. In the case of this research that was published in April, we used employee performance, bench strength, and change in hiring manager satisfaction to determine our best in class for assessments. Because we really wanted to look at both the hiring, retention, and development, as well as performance levels of individuals that were being brought into the organization. So we felt that organizations that were doing the best job in bringing in top candidates, getting those individuals up to speed quickly and getting optimal levels of employee performance, as well as making sure they had a deep pipeline of leadership bench strength. We wanted to understand what those organizations were doing differently. So we use our proprietary methodology to calculate people's performance on those key metrics and rank them. And we call out the top 20% of performers, which we term our best in class, the middle 50 that we call industry average, and the bottom 30 that we term laggards. Now, what the two pieces of our methodology allow us to do is that when we overlay them against each other, we really can understand what the best of the best are doing differently from all the rest of the organization. So we can understand what are the actions, the capabilities, and the enablers that best-in-class organizations have in place that are allowing them to achieve those differentiated levels of performance. So not only can we be very descriptive and help organizations benchmark their own performance and understand where they fall on this maturity curve, we can also be very prescriptive and help organizations understand what they should be doing next in order to continue to increase their performance levels and to achieve their desired outcomes. So it's just a little bit of a background on how we create the research that we're going to share with you. We're going to talk a lot about best in class. I want to make sure everyone had an understanding of what we really mean when we say best in class in these circumstances. So with all that as background, I want to start with building the case. How are organizations really making the case for assessments within their companies? This is a depiction of the talent lifecycle that we use here at Aberdeen. Many organizations, both end-user organizations and research organizations, have their own pictures. But they all have something like this, which is really a life cycle that talks about when individuals come into the organization, how they're retained, how they grow, how they're onboarded, and how you sort of plan for succession and ongoing development. And really underlying all these abilities are the ability to understand what competencies are required throughout the life cycle, as well as in particular jobs, and really learning at all phases of the life cycle as well. And what's really interesting is when you start to look at assessments and where assessments play a role in the talent life cycle, it really is interesting because they appear everywhere. Obviously, things like competencies, assessments are very valuable in helping you understand what competencies reside within an individual, as well as understanding the competencies that are aligned to top performance. And competencies become that common language throughout the life cycle. So assessments are very valuable when you're talking about competencies. Also in learning, both to help prescribe learning and make sure that learning has occurred, sort of make sure you're getting the return on that learning investment. But organizations use them in recruiting. They use assessments in onboarding to help manage performance and to help put together succession plans. So really, when you're looking throughout the talent life cycle, we're seeing assessments are playing an increasing role at all phases within an organization's talent life cycle. And there's good reason for this. It's not just because people sort of instinctually feel they're a good thing to do. When we look at the data, we see that organizations that are using assessments in both the pre and the post hire saw on average 18% more of their organizational goals achieved year after year, and 15% more of their new hires achieved their first performance milestone than organizations not using assessments. And what's even more compelling is when you look at this chart, you sort of look at the blue bar, which is organizations using assessments only in the pre-hire, the yellow in the pre and the post-hire, and then the red bar, organizations not using assessments at all. You really get what for a data geek like me is a beautiful curve going on, which is to say that organizations that are using assessments just in the pre-hire are doing better than those not using assessments. But organizations that are really focused on using assessments throughout the talent life cycle, the pre and the post-hire, are doing significantly better than both organizations not using assessments at all and those only using them in the pre-hire. So organizations that are using assessments throughout the talent life cycle are not only achieving more organizational goals, but they're getting new hires up to speed quickly, they're retaining their key talent, and they're able to fill positions internally, and they're building deeper bench strength. So it really starts to make the case for why you would not only want to use assessments, but really make sure you're using them throughout the talent life cycle. And if we've learned anything, and overall, when I look across all the talent research we've done in the past 6, 9, 12 months, it's that strong businesses require strong talent. Many organizations have growth on the agenda. It may not be as speedy or as high as we may have hoped in previous years, but organizations are growing again, and they really realize that talent is going to be a key differentiator for them to be able to support those growth goals. So organizations really know they need to be able to not only find but develop that key talent. And especially for organizations that may not be able to add headcount but need to grow as well, they need to upskill. So how can they make sure they understand what talent they have internally and where they may be able to develop and grow their next cadre of leaders internally as well? One of the key questions we asked when we did this survey was around goals for the use of assessments. And indeed, the number one goal is that pre-hire. So traditionally, where we thought of assessments, the industry evolved out of things like pre-hire testing. Obviously, the industry has evolved significantly since then, but a significant number of organizations still view the most valuable goal of assessments is to help make sure that you're improving the business by bringing better quality candidates in the door. We're also seeing the need to deliver leaders that can drive innovation and growth. And I thought this was so fascinating because it's not only about leadership skills kind of in the traditional way we may have thought, but this is really closely tied to agility. How do we make sure we have leaders that are not only able to lead today, but have the flexibility and the ingenuity and the creativity to help lead us through whatever challenges lie ahead. And assessments can really help you understand how you can put together a team that's going to be resilient in that way and help drive that innovation and growth that's going to be required by a rapidly changing marketplace. And of course, we're seeing improving that organizational fit among new hires. In our talent acquisition research, we've seen skills trumping fit when it comes to bringing people into the organization. Organizations realize that they hire for fit because they can train for some of the skills. So really being able to understand how you bring in people that have the right sort of leadership competencies and values that fit with your organization, as well as obviously you need the minimum skill requirements, but making sure that you're bringing in people who are going to be successful for day one because they really fit with your organizational culture. And the key pressures that we see among organizations were kind of interesting, particularly when you look at them at different companies with different employee sizes. The blue bar here is companies with less than 1,000 employees, the yellow 1,000 and above, and the red 5,000 and above. And it's interesting because small companies are really looking for growth. They're focused on making sure that they get the right talent in to help them grow even further. But large companies are really focused on the shortage of key leadership skills. And we're seeing this as well as baby boomers start to retire. Organizations are really wondering where that next level of leadership is going to come from. And they're not going to be able to just hire this kind of leadership away from their competitors. They really are going to need to make sure that they are focusing on developing those leaders for the future. And as organizations think about how they're going to head towards the future and execute against their priorities, they want to make better decisions. And assessments are a valuable tool that organizations are using to really help drive better data-driven decision making. And I sort of use the analogy: if the first rule of real estate is location, first three rules of real estate are location, location, location. The first three rules of talent management are data, data, data. And we see that when it comes to the actions that organizations are putting into place as well. Again, larger organizations are focused on building that competency framework where they can really make sure that they have a common language by which to assess. But large organizations are also really focused on making sure they can identify those skill gaps and improve talent segmentation. As you have large groups of employees, you want to make sure that you're targeting them appropriately for development and making sure that you understand where gaps may lie. Smaller organizations are also sort of reaching deeper and making sure that they're adding more rigor to their hiring process. You can see here that these sub-1,000 employee companies are really focused as well on making sure that all candidates are assessed as part of the hiring process. Again, as I mentioned, it's really all about making sure you have data to drive better decision making. Organizations really want to do better in all of their decision making and are paying attention to data points like those gleaned from assessments in making all their key talent decisions. It was interesting to note, too, as we looked at our best-in-class versus our industry average and our laggard organizations, as you can see overall, these best-in-class organizations are more likely to place a higher value on assessment data at a lot of these key decision points. And they also have some gaps in where they're more likely to bring in this assessment data to key decisions. So who to hire is sort of the universal area where organizations are bringing assessment data into the decision. But best-in-class organizations are really focused also on potential, which again is about not just making sure that you have individuals that can execute against the requirements for today, but that have in place the skills that are going to let them move and adapt. And really, as you think about those post-hire decisions as well, you need to make sure it's not just about getting the right people in the door. Obviously, that's an inflection point where you can really make sure you have a strong cultural fit and values fit. But it's also then how do you keep using this data to make better decisions around how you team people together, how you challenge them, how you develop them, to make sure that you are continuing to retain that talent and really put it to the best use for your organization. So that's a little bit of background on kind of making the business case for the value of assessments in talent decisions. The next theme I wanted to address is choosing the right tools. Because I often use the analogy saying assessments is sort of like saying fruit, right? There's a whole bunch of different types, and it's really not, they're not all created equal, they're not all meant for the same thing. And again, it's really about understanding the right tools for that right decision making. Organizations are hungry for data to drive their decisions, but you want to make sure you're using the data appropriately for the right kinds of decisions that you're making. So in our study, we looked at 4 distinct assessment types, starting with basic tests, which we define as sort of skills and abilities, more cognitive type of assessments. We looked at multidimensional or whole person assessments, things like personality and behavioral assessments. We also looked at high stakes assessments, more in-depth simulation-based, ones where individuals are really applying their experiences and knowledge. And then motivational assessments, understanding the motivational drivers and really sort of some of the engagement factors for individuals. And what was interesting is we looked at these different assessment types because we wanted to understand how and why, really help organizations understand how they can answer these 2 questions. Because when you're picking an assessment, you really need to make sure that you understand how and why the information is going to be used. You want to make sure that you're using the right kind of test to make the right kind of decision. As well as for the individuals who are going through the assessment themselves, you need to be able to explain to them how it's a benefit for them as well. I think that's one of the things we've seen sort of universally. Organizations that are achieving a lot of success with assessments, not only do they have organizational buy-in from kind of a managerial perspective, but they also have buy-in from the employees themselves, because both candidates and employees really understand the value that they can glean by learning more about themselves, whether it's from a skills and abilities point of view to help in development, whether it's things like behavioral and personality that can really help them understand how they can better interact and get the most out of their relationships with people. So it's about building that story of how and why assessment data can be used, both to make sure that you're using the right assessment, but also for really making sure that everyone involved in both implementing and making decisions based on this data understands what it's going to be used for. So when we look at these 4 types of assessments, we looked at them at various levels within the organization. And it's really interesting when you look at, as you sort of move from left to right, from college hired entry-level employees up through executives, we found some pretty interesting trends. Basic tests tend to be far less widely used in the executive ranks. So as you imagine, it makes a lot of sense that more entry-level, individual contributor type of roles are where basic tests are being used. But as you move up the organization into more frontline, mid-level, and executive management kind of positions, things like multidimensional whole person assessments, high stakes, and motivational assessments are used more widely. And this is important because when you think about kind of the span of control and influence that some of these more senior leaders will have, all the more important to make sure that they have the right kind of skill sets, but also the right kind of attitudes, behavior, and motivations that your organization really wants to make sure are widely cast within your organization. It's about making sure you have people with that right fit that really understand your culture and your value and priorities and are going to be able to sort of model that for the rest of the organization. So Sherrie, I know I've been chatting for quite a while here and sort of talking about making the case for assessments and how these different different types of tools are used. But I know you've had some great examples from some of the organizations you've worked with of how organizations are kind of putting some of these tools to use in their companies as well.
Yes, thank you, Molly. Our clients who utilize assessments during the selection phase look for tools with a high degree of reliability to predict key behaviors of success. The CPI 260 is a very popular assessment as it describes and predicts behaviors. It identifies thoughts, preferences, attitudes, and behavioral tendencies such as dealing with others, self-management, motivations, thinking styles, and these fit into the categories that you described of those multidimensional, whole person, the high stakes type of assessments. And depending on the role, you may select a score range target for specific characteristics that you're trying to identify, such as dominance or tolerance as examples. So this particular assessment yields very practical, down-to-earth insights that can make both selection and development more efficient and more productive. And a particular client example is a transportation company that we have worked with. They were experiencing rapid growth, so they were committed to hiring and developing 200 additional salespeople in a short amount of time. The goal was to identify candidates to drive revenues and reduce sales force turnover. CPP developed a solution that comprised of personality and competency profiles that would help identify the best candidates for the types of sales positions they were hiring for. We helped them identify the characteristics of successful salespeople in their organization and looked for those characteristics in potential candidates. And as a result, the organization was able to hire potential candidates that were fast-paced for their internal sales force. Because they have personal attributes and attitudes needed to make the most of the skills training they receive, these new hires are reaching high levels of performance and productivity faster and with lower turnover than past generations of new salespeople. Back to Molly.
And Sherrie, I think that's so important to think about because often we look at hiring metrics and we look at things like time to hire or cost to hire or some of these sort of efficiency metrics, which are important, but it's also so important to look at sort of the downstream impact. When you're able to make these more, more informed decisions, they have wide-ranging, long-lasting impact for your organization in terms of that increased productivity and that lower turnover. And so I think that's really important to say. Not only does it help in the immediate need to say, let's make the right decision in this moment, but also has payoff down the road. And that's really important when you think, too, about sort of the multiple places where organizations are using pre-hire data for post-hire activities. So, we asked this question, and the number one area where organizations said they were using pre-hire data and post-hire situations, the number one was around educating the hiring manager on style and preferences of new hire. We invest so much time and energy and money in learning about an individual when they're sort of in the candidate phase, and then we often sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you will, when we bring them inside the organization. Smart organizations are saying, we learned all this information about them, let's use that to plan a productive onboarding process, to plan a productive goal setting and development process for this individual to not only get them up to speed quickly but set them up for long-term success. Organizations are also using pre-hire assessments to identify high potential talent right from the start of their career, help people really be put on track to be able to be developed as leaders for the future. And then also prescribing that targeted learning and development planning. We've seen in some of our learning and development and engagement studies, one of the most important things you can do to engage an individual during their onboarding process is to really help them see their path forward from a career perspective, from a company perspective, helping them see how you're going to invest in their development and how they can grow within your company is a great way to help engage people right from the start of their career within your organization. We also look at elements of what elements are used when it comes to making a promotion decision. So obviously in a hiring decision, there's lots of pieces of information that come into play, and assessments are some of them. But when it comes to promotion as well, I think it's really interesting to look at this data because we can see that organizations that are not best in class, or those all others that are made up the industry average and laggard groups, they're more likely to rely on the hiring manager or supervisor recommendation. Now, best in class organizations still rely on that, they're also much more likely to also consider some of this assessment data as well. And in particular, that multidimensional whole person type of data, the personality information, and these high-stakes assessments where you have simulations and having people sort of apply their knowledge. So it's really interesting. Top-performing companies, they're not discounting the hiring manager or the promoting manager, supervisor recommendation. It's about also giving that assessment data a voice in the process. And they're really getting more sophisticated and rigorous in their use of assessment data as part of the criteria for that decision making, not just in hiring but in the promotion decisions as well. And again, we looked at those 4 assessment types across these various post-hire decisions: determining high potential, putting someone in a succession plan, and promoting people to leadership roles. And again, we see that best-in-class organizations more likely to use various assessment types in this decision-making process, and particularly when you look at some of these multidimensional whole person sort of personality type of assessments, really valuable in helping to understand who's ready to take some of those next career steps. And Sherrie, I know there's some of your other clients that are using assessments not only in those pre-hire decisions we just talked about, but also in some of these post-hire as well.
Definitely, Molly. During the onboarding and performance management phases, assessments need to be chosen that focus on identifying natural strengths, blind spots, interpersonal communication styles, conflict management strategies. And this type of data allows employees to leverage talent and create development plans to maximize their performance. One particular tool that's utilized during this phase is the MBTI assessment. It identifies innate preferences for taking in information, making decisions, and interacting with others. It provides a common language for understanding different personality styles. This self-awareness creates an environment during the onboarding process to facilitate teamwork and enhance leadership skills. Another very popular tool organizations are using is the ThyroB assessment. It helps individuals understand how their needs can shape their interactions with others. When our needs are met on a team, we engage with others, we contribute and collaborate. But when our needs are frustrated, we tend to withdraw, complain, or procrastinate. So it's during this performance management cycle that this insight will help employees to improve their interactions with others, resulting in increased productivity and improved performance. Another tool that's used commonly is the TKI assessment. It reveals how individuals handle conflict and how to adopt the most appropriate style for different situations. So during the onboarding phase, it's critical for a new employee to quickly navigate the organizational culture, as it may be very different from their prior organizational culture. They can learn to adapt strategies for managing disagreements. And throughout this performance management phase, an employee that's unable to manage conflict will derail, while those effectively handling conflict are more likely to succeed. A particular client example that we have worked with is the U.S. Air Force. Their challenge in the past, promotions to leadership positions, were based primarily on technical ability. So as you describe some of these basic tests and other sort of assessments used to identify technical ability, that wasn't working particularly well for their leadership ranks. So the senior personnel lacked the requisite leadership skills for managing complex problems. They experienced high turnover, lack of improvement, and there was a general lack of innovation. So the solution involved administering the MBTI, the ThyroB, and the TKI to enhance self-awareness and provide individuals with knowledge about themselves. They use this information to apply self-knowledge to handle conflict, change, and decision-making. And as a result, the U.S. Air Force improved their teamwork, their accountability. They were able to anticipate challenges, proactively create action plans that would enable them to address their blind spots. They made results-oriented behavioral changes. And finally, they were able to truly appreciate diversity and the value of different thoughts and perspectives. Back to Mollie.
Thanks so much, Sherrie. And I think, they are a really excellent example as well of helping articulate how, a particular assessment intervention can be useful not only to the organization's ability to achieve its goals, but also for the individual, and really helping the individual understand what they can really take away from the experience of having been involved in an assessment program as well. And, I love this quote, a fact in itself is nothing, it's valuable only for the idea attached to it or the proof which it furnishes, which is this idea that, an assessment is not about a right or wrong sort of determination. It's simply an understanding of a particular fact, and then it's what you do to act upon that, or what you do to sort of either modify behavior or to understand where you may need to develop or things that you may need to focus on. And I think that's an important thing to think about when we think about assessment, because it's not just about what the data is telling us, it's also about how that's correlated to the individual and the organization's ongoing performance. And that's certainly something that we're seeing organizations that are getting best-in-class results focus on. These best-in-class organizations are able to correlate their post-hire assessment results to their ongoing performance, as well as pre-hire assessments to ongoing performance. Because again, it's not just about understanding what your score is on a particular assessment. It's about being able to understand what does that score or that insight that we're given back from that assessment intervention, how does that correlate to an individual's ability to perform at a high level on an ongoing basis? And best-in-class organizations are continuing to check that. They want to go back and be able to understand, how do we tweak this? How do we make sure that we're hiring and developing the right people and for the right things? Because we have a really strong understanding of how this correlates to ongoing individual and organizational performance. And again, an assessment is not a one-and-done situation. It's not like you pick an assessment and, sort of you never have to think about it again, sort of the set it and forget it model. It's really about how you use it as a tool for ongoing conversation for individuals and for the organization to make sure you're continually upgrading the talent and continue to develop talent to make sure that you have the right skills, behaviors, and characteristics required to execute on your business goals. And this also shows up when we think about how organizations are going about selecting their solution partners. It's, it's a given that the valid and reliable science has to be there. A vendor obviously is going to come to you with all of the research and the science behind their validated models for their assessments. But it's interesting that best-in-class organizations are also really concerned about making sure that their partner is able to prove accuracy in predicting potential. So again, it's not just about how is this individual going to perform today, but how do I really look to the future and understand the ability of this assessment to help predict their ongoing performance? All other organizations are a little more focused on the current performance as opposed to that potential. And, price is always, a factor, but really best-in-class organizations are much more focused on that value. We sort of talk about the ongoing value of making the right decision. It's not just about sort of the efficiency factors of making a hiring or a promotion decision. It's really about being able to select the people that are going to have the most impact for your business. So it's really about the value return. It's not really about a low-cost decision. It's really about a value creation decision for these organizations. And it's also important to think when you're selecting a solution to think about what I call sort of these two kinds of validity. There's the external and the internal. And as I said, it's a given that a solution partner is going to be able to come to you with a valid and reliable science behind their assessment solution. But it's that internal validity, that ability to go back and correlate and understand the ongoing impact of using a particular assessment type to make hiring and promotion and other decisions as well. It was a great example. I was talking with a leader in a retail organization, and they went back and did an impact study, and they looked at 500 individuals who had been hired into the organization that had been ranked when they came in based on some assessments as highly recommend to hire, recommend with reservations, and don't recommend. Now, hiring managers had the final decision. They didn't have to obey what came out of the assessments. So they had individuals who had all been offered jobs and had been on the job who were of all three categories. When they looked at the 500 individuals across each of those categories, they then correlated it to individual and overall store sales. Now, you can imagine it was actually billions of dollars. This is a large retail chain. Billions of dollars that were at stake. The difference between hiring someone who was, recommend with reservations versus strongly recommend, or someone who was recommended not to hire versus someone who was sort of hired with recommendations. So just that idea of getting a little bit closer to that ideal candidate from an assessment perspective can have a huge impact. Now, again, that's a particular type of assessment, it's used in a hiring situation. But organizations need to really understand the value of making sure you have those best fit candidates and that you're really supporting people as they move through the talent life cycle to make sure that you're developing, again, those critical skills and making sure that you're putting the right people in the right positions to not only further their own careers, but further your organization's goals as well. And that really segues into the last theme today, which is about crafting the employee experience. So obviously, from an organizational perspective, assessment data can help you drive better decisions. But you can also use it to make sure that you're creating an employee experience that's going to get the most for you, out of your relationship with that employee. We talked a little bit about where pre-hire data is used in the post-hire, but when we look overall where assessment data is integrated, onboarding is a critical area. But best-in-class organizations are also looking even longer term into that strategic or business planning and workforce planning. So organizations that are best in class are saying, we know where our business is going in the future. We can see that strategic plan, and we want to make sure we have the right talent in place to support it. So we're going to say, this is the talent base we have today. How does that map to our ongoing needs from a strategic planning and a workforce planning basis? So it's really interesting to see how these companies are able to use this data, and it helps drive some of that gap analysis between talent available within the organization today and what may be required in the future. And best-in-class organizations are not only integrating that data, but they understand it's about assessing and also acting. Best-in-class companies really focus on an ongoing process. Again, it's not a standalone event. It's not the set-it-and-forget-it model. It's about how you take this data and how you take action upon it. Making sure that you have the right data to drive action, whether that's the multidimensional and whole person data, that high stakes, the simulation, how people are really going to apply that information, and going beyond just competencies, but understanding what an individual knows how to do, but also how they can apply that to really drive the business forward as well. And we looked at best-in-class organizations. They're much more likely than all others to use this data to drive follow-up. So they're building individual development plans based on assessment data. They're making career path decisions. And they're using follow-up coaching. It's really driving an interaction and an experience for that individual. It's not about, take this test because it's going to help us decide what we're going to do with you. It's really a two-way conversation that becomes the basis for creating a plan to engage that individual as well with the business. And Sherrie, I know you're seeing organizations that you work with use some of these assessments in these capacities as well.
Definitely, Molly. During the succession planning phase, an organization needs to groom and develop their high potential candidates for leadership roles, and this is an area where we focus utilizing the CPI 260 assessment, for example, as a great coaching and leadership development tool, and it has the foundation of 55 years worth of research and successful real-life applications. The CPI 260 report gives specific feedback to suggest growth and development areas that are critical for effective succession planning. They equip managers with personalized information that enables them to identify leadership strengths, blind spots, help them target areas for development, and plan action steps to increase effectiveness. A particular client example that we have worked with in this way is the U.S. military. And their challenge was to improve their leadership development program for senior personnel to help it develop a system for capturing and using aggregate information to create performance benchmarks. As a solution, CPP created what we called a validated portrait of a leader with clearly identified leadership competencies. Through our research services, we helped them to provide competency summaries for each individual that attended the program. As a result, these summaries that were created enabled the officers to benchmark their competencies against those of other successful leaders within the military specialty and to grow their leadership skills. So they could compare their competencies to those deemed successful and know precisely what areas to focus on for development. Back to Molly.
You know, and I think it's really important, again, it's not just about the assessment, it's about the action you take after it, and really how you help individuals see their role as well in taking action. It's not just sort of an action that the organization may take, it's also how do you enable the individual and give them the tools to create that positive experience as well. And indeed, you know, this chart compares organizations that offer development planning and coaching as a follow-up to their assessments versus those that don't. And you can see the correlation here. Organizations that use that follow-up achieve a far greater number of their organizational goals. They have more employees rating themselves highly engaged. Again, they're having that conversation about how you can apply these results and use them to advance your career. They have stronger bench strength, and they also have successors who are exceeding their performance goals. So I really think that's interesting. These individuals who receive this development planning and coaching, when they actually are moved into their new role in a succession after succession planning, they're able to achieve more from the beginning. They're able to really exceed their goals in their new role as well. And so you can see across the board, it's about not just assessing, but then the action you take afterwards to create and craft that experience that's going to drive optimal levels of performance. So, you know, in a nutshell, so to speak, the data we've shared today, really organizations all need better talent to support their business goals. I don't think there's any business leader or talent leader you could talk to today that wouldn't agree that your people, your employees, are what going to really allow you to differentiate yourself going forward. So organizations need strong talent to power their business. And, you know, data rules. Organizations are hungry to use data to make better decisions around their talent and really manage the risk around their talent decisions, help give them some transparency and some better tools for this decision making. And we're seeing that organizations that are really achieving the most from their assessments efforts are the ones who understand the need to use the right tool for the right decision point and making sure that your assessment strategy is really aligned with where the business is going, the business's needs, and the results you're trying to achieve, to make sure that you're going back and validating the impact that that assessments are having on your business, as well as making sure you understand that you're still assessing for the right things when it comes to both selecting and developing people, putting them into succession plans within your business. So with that, I think we'll turn it back over to Laura.
Great. Thank you, Mollie and Sherrie. For our listeners, I'd like to take this opportunity to share this information about CPP's MBTI and CPI 260 certification programs, and to encourage you to discover the benefits of using these assessments with your employees or clients. Now, let's take some of your questions. We have a question that I want to pose to both Mollie and Sherrie. When you use assessments in the pre-hire process, how do you ensure that the hiring practices are within compliance with hiring rules? For example, how do you ensure the recruiter and hiring managers exclude biases based on how they interpret the assessment data?
Sure. I mean, Sherrie, I can give a general response, and then you probably have some specifics about the tools that you all have at CPP.
Sure.
But I would say, you know, a lot of it comes down to, again, that awareness of what it is you're trying to accomplish and what the goal of a particular assessment is. And that also, you know, means training. It means having an understanding from the hiring manager as well as from the recruiters of, you know, what this particular assessment does and does not do. You know, you wouldn't use a personality assessment as a knockout in a hiring situation, right? You know, it's not about it's about understanding the purpose and the scope of each assessment that you're using. And one of the slides that I know we skipped over a little bit, but it talked about some of the criteria that organizations are using, and a lot of it has to do with having a solution partner that has the valid and reliable science as well as the context to help set for the individuals who are using the output of the assessment to use it appropriately. So I would say, you know, it really comes down to understanding what it is you're trying to assess for, and then making sure that the assessment results are, you know, that people are trained on how to use the assessment results in the appropriate way, setting that right context for them so that they're not using them inappropriately. Sherrie?
Yes, I agree absolutely, Mollie. And the key, which Mollie emphasized, is having someone trained to know how to interpret the results. So backing up just a bit on the question, to make sure that during this pre-hire situation that it's following in line with the rules. So you would want to find out for your state what rules should be followed. The APA might have guidelines for your state. And having someone that's qualified on the particular tool that is used so that they do know exactly how to interpret the results. And keeping in mind, for example, our tool, the CPI 260, falls into one particular category. So it is the personality component of what we would recommend as a battery of assessments. So if you are utilizing tools assessments during the selection process, you should be using multiple parameters to determine if that person is an adequate fit. So the CPI 260, for example, would be a personality component, and it is predictive of behaviors, thoughts, and attitudes. In addition to that, you would, of course, be looking at experience, background, what skills are necessary for them to perform that specific job. So in summary for that question, you wouldn't make a hiring decision with a personality assessment component alone, but it is a great addition to a battery of different parts of your process for selecting.
Yeah, Sherrie, and I think that's such a great point. It's not about a one and done. It's not about a one test and a one answer. It's really about sort of getting that multifaceted view of the talent to make the decision.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you, both Mollie and Sherrie. Sherrie, I have a question for you. How is the MBTI to be used in the hiring process?
The question is a great question because it is a very simple answer. The MBTI is not designed as a hiring tool. The MBTI identifies information that is very different than tools that are designed and validated for use in selection. So the MBTI identifies natural personality preferences. It's a non-judgmental tool, and it is resulting in information that all the different types have equal strengths, blind spots. So it's not a tool for selection. It works wonderfully once someone is on board to help identify how they communicate within a team, how they may lead differently, how they may communicate as with different styles, but again, not used for selection. Thank you, Laura.
Great. Thank you, Sherrie. And Mollie, good question here for you. How applicable are these learnings about best-in-class to nonprofit organizations?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So obviously, we've used some of the making the case with things like things like business performance. But you'll notice we also phrased the criteria around a goal achievement around your organizational objectives achieved or critical performance indicators achieved. So we really tried to contextualize it that if your critical performance indicator is not necessarily around profitability or things like that, it could be around sort of the mission or the clients you may serve as a non-for-profit. The same rules apply, if you will, when it comes down to make sure that you're correlating the assessments results to what is important to your organization. So, one of the things we talked about, we talked about sort of the scientific validity and making sure that your assessments are in compliance with all the appropriate rules. But the other level of validity you really need to think about is sort of within your organization. So if what you care about is measuring, having employees have the biggest impact on revenue, that's what you want to correlate. You want to be able to say, okay, individuals that are achieving top performance of revenue, what does their, sort of assessment profile look like? What are the types of things we might be assessing for to find people with those characteristics? But if you are a not-for-profit and have different metrics by which you're sort of managing your performance, those are where you need to correlate. If it's all about sort of, client service or achievement of, other metrics, then what you need to do is define your high performers by those criteria and be able to look back. Again, assessments aren't about a good or a bad judgment. It's around various combination of skills, capabilities, and and behaviors that drive a particular result. So it's about understanding for your particular company what kind of result you're looking for, and then being able to say, what are the types of things I should be assessing for or should be looking for as I bring people into the organization or promote them within the organization that are going to help me achieve those goals. So there's the external validity to say, does this test really tell me about A, B, C? But then there's also a conversation that says, well, what's really important to my organization, and how do I make sure that I'm aligning the tools that I'm using to the achievement of those goals, whether they're sort of around profitability and revenue or to other goals if we're a nonprofit organization.
Great. Thanks, Mollie. Another question for both of you. At what point in the pre-hire process should a company invest in a potential hire? In other words, at what point should we spend money?
Yeah. So I have some data on that wasn't in these slides, but it's interesting because the two most common use cases I see are sort of, you can kind of draw a little bit of a grouping around them. One is if you're in a high volume situation, it tends to be sort of earlier in the process. So organizations that are in more of a high volume situation are investing earlier because they have such a sort of influx of applicants that they want to make, that it's worth the investment there to save the time and energy of getting into an involved, sort of hiring process. They want to use assessment data up front. They may use further assessments later on in the process, but they're sort of investing up front. In other organizations where it may be, again, sort of thinking about those more senior level, usually it's not the very first step, but we are seeing it, sort of increasingly early on enough that you're able to bring that data into some of the decision-making process. So, it's about not just thinking about how the assessment can guide your decision at the very end of a hiring process, but it's also about, how do you adapt the hiring process to make sure you're getting the most information. You can learn really valuable things that can guide your interview style or guide, sort of the rest of the questions you want to ask that applicant based on what you learned in an assessment. So I think that's, we're seeing, again, high volume tends to invest earlier in the process just because it saves them so much in the back end. But I would say that, I would encourage organizations, especially once you have gotten a couple of iterations, of your assessment tool and have some of your own individual data back, to be able to say, based on what we learn in an assessment, how can we use that to guide not only the final decision, but even the rest of the interview process?
Great. Sherrie, did you want to add anything?
Sure. I agree completely with Mollie. Just a couple of additional thoughts is definitely early with high volume, and also depending on the particular level of the employee, what is the return on your investment if you do invest early compared to the risk of a poor hire. And you think about the cost that if a poor hire is brought on board and then you lose that particular person and you have to go back and start over with the hiring process. So I would look at the costs associated with poor hires as a way to rationalize. And what I'm getting a sense of is the budget that's definitely earmarked for investing in the hiring process and what risks are compared to that investment.
Yeah, it's interesting, Sherrie. I've run some cuts of our data looking particularly at kind of some of those high-stakes assessments and ones that are more often correlated with those more senior-level hires.
Right.
Price goes way down the selection criteria when you look at organizations specifically focused on those types of assessments for those groups. Yeah. Because, again, I think they realize it's about the predictability and it's about the sort of risk management that is what you're purchasing, if you will. It's really it's a hedge as opposed to an expense. It's a way to sort of mitigate some of that risk. And I think especially organizations that are looking at kind of senior levels are realizing that that return or the management of that risk is worth the investment.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. We're almost to the end of the webinar. I want to ask one more question in our remaining 2 minutes here. So for both of you, question is, can potential hires and internal employees challenge assessment results? And can those results be disclosed for challenging the results?
So I'm going to let Sherrie handle some of this because obviously the rules are different for various types of assessments, and they're different in different locations. I guess what I would say, though, just sort of as a general comment before that, is it's important to have a clear what's in it for me, I think, for individuals to help them understand how the assessment data is going to be used and also how it's not going to be used. Because so setting up that dynamic of that they're going to get something out of it is really important, I think, sort of nipping those kind of situations in the bud. But Sherrie, I'll let you respond to this question a little more quickly.
Certainly. And Mollie is exactly on the right track. It needs to be presented as it's part of the selection process, and it's not being utilized in any sort of feedback for the candidate, which is opposed to how these particular tools may be used once they come on board. So setting those expectations is very important, that they're not to expect to receive results. And as far as challenging the results, for example, if someone is not hired, if they can go back and prove in a court of law that an assessment was used inappropriately in a hiring process, then they could have a case for discrimination. For example, if an organization uses one single tool as opposed to a battery of assessments, as opposed to a full line of processes, then that company is at risk for a discrimination lawsuit. The tool needs to be appropriate for selection. For example, the MBTI is not a selection tool, so a company is at risk if they use such a tool for hiring. The CPI, as opposed to the MBTI, does meet the APA guidelines for discrimination, so it fits into the ethical guidelines, and it has held up to challenges in the court of law. So if it's used appropriately, the appropriate tool, in the context of an arsenal of various methodology for selection, then the company is typically safe for choosing selection tools.
Excellent. Thank you both. We've come to the end of today's webinar, and we want to thank everyone for joining us, and especially to Mollie and Sherrie for sharing their knowledge and expertise with us. Goodbye, everyone.